Welcome to The Debate. Um, Imagine spending $30 million to essentially invent the absolute future of pop music, right? Only to have the entire project swallowed whole by, well, a corporate war over the Beatles.
Yeah, which sounds completely absurd when you say it out loud.
It does. It really does. And I was just looking around at the setup we have in this room today. We are sitting in this high-tech studio, and we are completely surrounded by what must be $30 million worth of audio equipment.
Oh, easily. The massive analog mixing consoles, the digital interfaces, even the acoustic paneling in here.
Exactly. It is quite literally a cathedral of sound.
And it's incredibly imposing, isn't it? Like you walk into a room like this and you feel the weight of the investment before you even hear a single note play. It just demands perfection.
It really does. And that feeling, right, that immense physical weight of unprecedented financial investment in the pursuit of absolute sonic perfection, that is a deliberate mirror of the subject we are dissecting today.
Right, the lost masterpiece.
Yes. We are looking at Michael Jackson's 2001 album Invincible, a project that carried a staggering $30 million recording budget. And, to this day, it is widely considered the most expensive album ever made.
A very heavy title to carry.
Extremely heavy. But the central question that hangs over this record is, frankly, as heavy as its price tag. Was Invincible a futuristic R&B blueprint whose avant-garde sonic architecture justified every single cent of that massive cost?
Or was it a financially chaotic, totally orphaned masterpiece? Because from where I sit, looking at the history of this project, that $30 million was a symptom of unchecked perfectionism, and that ultimately doomed the record, leaving it swallowed by a bitter corporate war for assets.
And that is the exact tension we are exploring today, because I stand firmly on the side that Invincible is a visionary triumph. I consider it a masterclass in what I call architectural sound.
Architectural sound, okay.
Yeah. It was an uncompromising sonic blueprint that consciously rejected the standard pop synthesis of the late 90s. And in doing so, I argue it predicted future genres like dubstep a full 10 years early. The budget wasn't just indulgence. It was the necessary cost of absolute perfection.
I come at it from a very different angle. I argue that this supposed perfectionism was, well, largely a facade for logistical and financial chaos.
You don't think it was genuine perfectionism?
Not in the way it manifested, no. The $30 million recording budget wasn't just about sculpting sound. It was inflated by booking multiple coast-to-coast studios simultaneously and just leaving them empty while he worked in one.
Well, he needed options.
But options cost money. And when you pair that financial bleed with a $200 million personal loan, it turned the artist into a target. The album's legacy is inextricably tied to the Sony War. An obsession with the future caused him to lose his grip on the present, leaving the music sacrificed in a ruthless corporate battle over a billion-dollar publishing catalog.
I mean, I hear the cynicism about the budget. I do. But we have to look at where that money actually went. Because it wasn't just burning in empty studios. It was funding a radical reimagining of how rhythm itself is constructed.
Okay, let's talk about the construction then.
Let's talk about what I like to call the Junkyard Protocol.
Aha, you're talking about the Rodney Jerkins sessions.
Precisely. To understand the mandate for Invincible, you have to look at the landscape of 2001. Max Martin, NCS, Sync, the Backstreet Boys, they were dominating the charts with these very polished, bright, synthesized pop sounds.
Very clean, very melodic.
Very clean. Jackson brought in Rodney Jerkins, who was young and hungry, and essentially ordered him to throw away his standard drum machines.
Which is a bold move for a pop record. Extremely bold.
But he said, if you want to invent the future, you can't use the tools of the present. So Jerkins literally took DAT recorders, digital audio tapes, and went to local junkyards.
Wait, so they were literally bringing the sounds of crushed metal into a $30 million studio?
Literally, yes. And the reason they use DAT recorders is actually really important. Digital audio tape captures incredibly high-fidelity, uncompressed sound in a portable format. So Jerkins was out there smashing glass, striking corrugated metal sheets, crushing industrial debris.
Just making a massive racket.
Exactly. He took these violent, aggressive, incredibly organic acoustic sounds, brought them back into the studio, and mapped them onto digital samplers. So when he hits middle C on a keyboard, you aren't hearing a snare drum. You are hearing an isolated waveform of a shattered car windshield tuned to a specific musical pitch.
Which is a painstakingly slow process. I mean, doing that for every sound?
Unbelievably painstaking. You have to clean the audio, truncate it, loop it, and build entirely new rhythmic beds from scratch. But the result is the brutalism you hear on tracks like Unbreakable and Heartbreaker.
They are very heavy tracks.
Right. You are hearing the heavy, glitchy, complex programming that effectively invented dubstep and aggressive EDM a full decade before those genres took over the global charts. Jackson asked a profound question. If someone can invent a piano or a drum, why can't we invent the next instrument?
I understand the ambition there. I do.
Creating an entire industrial landscape from scratch requires thousands of hours of studio time. And yes, time is money. That requires $30 million.
But $30 million, honestly, you can invent a genre for a fraction of that in a basement if you have the right ear. You don't need to hold 3 top-tier studios hostage just to hit a garbage can.
I think you're undervaluing the fidelity required.
And honestly, while I'm not denying that the Junkyard Protocol yielded some fascinating textures, you have to look at the opportunity cost. It's like spending millions of dollars to invent a brand new shade of the color blue, and in the process, completely forgetting to paint the actual painting.
How do you mean? What painting did he forget?
Well, while they were out in junkyards smashing glass to sound futuristic, they were actively rejecting guaranteed, earth-shattering pop hits. Think about the Neptunes.
Right, Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo.
Yes, exactly. In 2001, the Neptunes are becoming the hottest producers on the planet. They presented Jackson with a suite of instrumentals specifically meant for this album. One of those tracks was a song called Rock Your Body.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Right. Jackson listened to the demo and rejected it. He felt it was too disco-infused. He was an artist over 40. And you can sense this absolute terror of sounding like a legacy act.
He didn't want to repeat Off the Wall.
But so he rejected a melodic pop masterpiece to focus on this aggressive, glitchy, junkyard sound. And what happens? The Neptunes hand that exact track over to Justin Timberlake, and it becomes a global, career-defining phenomenon.
It was a massive hit, sure.
A massive hit. So my pushback here is that this obsession with an abstract future blinded the project to the pop present. He spent $30 million trying to avoid his past, and in doing so, essentially handed the future of pop music to someone else.
That is a very common criticism, but I frame it completely differently. Rejecting Rock Your Body wasn't a mistake. I think it was a matter of artistic integrity.
Artistic integrity? By turning down a surefire hit?
Yes, because he had already perfected disco pop in 1979 with Off the Wall. Why repeat it? If he had released Rock Your Body in 2001, critics would have roasted him for living in the past. He wanted extreme contrasts on Invincible.
Contrast is fine, but you still need a radio hit.
The contrast between those industrial metallic beats and his absolute mastery of his vocal cords is breathtaking.
The shift in his vocal registry on this album is definitely jarring. I'll give you that. Jarring?
But brilliant. I am talking about the astonishing reality of the track 2000 Watts. When that song dropped, everyone, including seasoned music critics, assumed the vocals were digitally manipulated.
Because it was so deep.
Right. They thought Teddy Riley had used pitch shifting software to drag his vocal down. Because in 2001, digital pitch shifting sounded very robotic. Think of Cher's Believe.
Right, it had that artificial metallic drag to it. You could hear the computer working.
Exactly. But the reality is that the deep, resonant bass on 2000 Watts is his genuine, unmanipulated baritone. He drops all the way down to a G2 note.
Which is incredibly low for him.
To hit a G2, your vocal cords literally have to thicken and relax, which is incredibly difficult for someone whose natural speaking and singing voice has spent decades operating as a high tenor. For years, vocal coaches had him speaking in a higher register just to preserve his upper range. So when he finally lets his larynx drop naturally on this track, it's shocking.
It also completely debunked those bizarre rumors from Conrad Murray about, chemical castration in his youth.
Physiologically, if that were true, his vocal cords would never have developed the mass required to hit a G2 note.
Precisely. The biology proves the sheer power of his natural instrument. But he didn't just stay in that dark basement register. He juxtaposed that baritone with a pivot into the emerging neo-soul movement.
Like on the track Butterflies?
Exactly. Look at Butterflies, where he collaborated with Marcia Ambrosius from the duo Floetry. To hit those delicate, airy falsettos, which were originally keyed for a female vocalist, he didn't rely on Pro Tools. The engineer, Bruce Swedian, was militant about capturing the warmth of the music on analog tape.
Because of the magnetic particles, right?
Yes, the magnetic particles on analog tape physically capture the richness of sound in a way the sterile binary ones and zeros of early digital recording couldn't.
So he had to perform it perfectly. There was no digital safety net.
He did. He spent 2 hours on the phone running vocal scales with his coach, Seth Riggs, and then literally danced aggressively in the studio to empty backing tracks just to elevate his heart rate and get the adrenaline pumping before stepping to the mic.
Wow.
And then there's Speechless, which he composed in its entirety in 45 minutes after a joyful water balloon fight in Germany. He rapped an a cappella opening in rich acoustic orchestration. I mean, the vocal performances alone justify the budget.
Look, the physiological mastery on 2,000 watts and the delicacy of Butterflies are undeniable. I acknowledge the vocal genius, I really do.
But
But I just don't buy that the vocal performances existed in a vacuum, insulated from the financial reality of the project. You're focusing on the micromechanics of his vocal cords. I'm looking at the macroeconomics of the boardroom, because that artistry was ultimately suffocated by the Sony War.
the corporate side of this era is certainly dark, I agree, but I don't think it diminishes the art itself.
It didn't just diminish the art, it swallowed it whole. Let's just do the math on this for a second. You have a $30 million recording budget. You had $25 million in global marketing and promotion from Sony. That means the label needs to recoup $55 million before anyone, the label or the artist, sees a single dime of profit.
Which, in the peak of the CD era, was actually possible for him.
Possible, yes, but you have to look at how recoupment works in the industry. The artist pays back that $55 million out of their percentage of the album sales, not the gross. It requires moving an astronomical amount of physical units.
True.
But that's just the surface layer of the trap. Below that album budget, Jackson had secured a $200 million personal loan from Sony to fund his lifestyle and other investments. And what was the collateral for that massive loan?
His 50% stake in the ATV publishing catalog.
Exactly, which included the publishing rights to 250 Beatles songs. It is arguably the most valuable single asset in the history of the music business. So, look at the architecture of this deal. You have CEO Tommy Mottola and Sony sitting on a massive debt. It is essentially like taking out a massive mortgage on a gold mine just to fund a lemonade stand.
That's an interesting way to frame it.
If the lemonade stand, which is invincible, fails commercially, and Jackson defaults on that $200 million loan, the bank gets the gold mine. And Sony was the bank.
They were.
They were in the prime position to seize total control of a multi-billion-dollar publishing asset. It created a perverse incentive. It was a literal corporate sabotage scenario where the label stood to gain far more financially if the album bombed than if it succeeded.
Hold on, though. I struggle with that line of reasoning because Sony did spend $25 million on marketing initially. They pushed the first single, You Rock My World. Why would they spend tens of millions of dollars out of pocket if their master plan was to sabotage their own product from day one?
Because they had to put up a front. They couldn't just breach contract immediately or they'd be sued into oblivion. But the moment there was friction, specifically his refusal to do a grueling multi-year world tour to recoup those astronomical costs, they pulled the plug.
They did pull it very quickly.
They abruptly cut all promotional efforts. Think about the missed visionary concepts. Jackson wanted to make a groundbreaking VFX short film for the song Unbreakable, partnering with George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic.
Oh, that would have been incredible.
Right? He wanted to push the boundaries of music video into pure cinema, like he did with Scream. But because of this corporate war, the funding was instantly slashed. We only ever got one full music video with his actual participation.
The artistry you're praising was actively starved of oxygen by the very executives who funded it.
It is a profound tragedy that the Unbreakable short film never happened. I will grant you that. The oxygen was deliberately sucked out of the room by corporate egos. Jackson even took to a double-decker bus in New York with 150 fans to protest Sony.
Yeah, holding up signs. It was surreal.
Calling out Mottola publicly, it was incredibly surreal. But even though the corporate machine abandoned the record, I still maintain the music survives that boardroom drama. The album was ready to redefine the decade.
But Mottola didn't just wake up and decide to bury the album out of spite. The artist's own camp handed the label the exact PR-friendly weapon they needed to kill the project. We have to talk about the 9/11 charity scandal because it is the nail in the coffin of this orphan masterpiece.
You're bringing up the charity single, What More Can I Give?
I have to because it illustrates exactly how the business ate the art. After the September 11th attacks, Jackson wanted to do something profound. He gathered an incredible supergroup, Beyoncé, Celine Dion, Mariah Carey, Justin Timberlake, to record a track called What More Can I Give?
He envisioned it as the spiritual successor to We Are the World.
Exactly, hoping to raise $50 million for the victims' families. But Sony executives looked at this massive charity single and saw an immediate existential threat.
They were terrified it would overshadow the release of Invincible.
They were terrified of the wallet share. It's late 2001. Physical CD sales are the only metric that matters. If an average consumer has $15 in their pocket and they spend their money and media attention on a charity single, they aren't buying the $55 million studio album.
And Sony desperately needed to recoup their investment.
Right. And this charity single was going to siphon off their revenue. They wanted to kill the charity track, but you can't just cancel a 9/11 charity single without looking like a total monster. They needed a public relations excuse. And Jackson's executive producer for the project, Mark Schaffel, handed it to them.
Ah, yes, the background check.
Exactly. Investigative reports reveal that Mark Schaffel had a significant past producing and directing gay pornography. Now, does that have anything to do with the music? No. But the second Sony found out, they seized upon it.
They weaponized it.
They absolutely weaponized that scandal. They claimed brand protection and immediately halted all distribution of What More Can I Give?
And the fallout from that was incredibly messy.
It was chaos. Jackson fired Schaffel, which triggered years of bitter lawsuits involving money literally being passed around in fast food bags coated as French fries.
Wow.
It was a circus. The charity track was locked in a vault, only released years later as a $2 digital download when its cultural moment had entirely passed. That chaos, that scandal, gave Sony the absolute cover they needed to wash their hands of Invincible. They could point to the circus and say, "We can't promote this artist right now."
I understand why you emphasize the Schaffel scandal, because it highlights the vulnerability of the artist in that ecosystem. But let me offer a different perspective on the ultimate legacy of this era.
Okay.
Yes, the boardroom drama was incredibly bitter. Yes, the lawsuits were messy, and the financial pressure was absurd. But when you strip away Tommy Mottola, the ATV catalog loans, and the Mark Schaffel scandal, what are you actually left with?
A massive pile of debt?
No, you are left with the physical media. You are left with the sound. And Invincible stands as a breathtakingly ambitious architectural soundscape.
You really believe the music escapes the context of its creation? You can just ignore the $55 million debt?
I believe the music outlives the debt. I really do. When you listen to the album today, you don't hear a balance sheet. You hear the flawless analog fidelity that Bruce Sweetin captured. You hear the brutal industrial beats built from junkyard scraps, seamlessly sitting alongside the delicate, organic neo-soul melodies of Marsha Ambrosia's.
It is a fascinating record to listen to, sure.
To me, it proves that the $30 million was actually well spent. It wasn't financial chaos. It was the heavy cost of a futuristic blueprint that the rest of the electronic and pop industry would literally spend the next decade trying to catch up to. You can't put a price tag on inventing the future.
That's a highly romantic view. But I stand by my assessment. Invincible is and will forever remain a tragic, bittersweet orphan masterpiece. It isn't just an album. It serves as a stark investigative case study.
A case study in what, exactly?
It shows us exactly how unchecked financial chaos, the stubborn rejection of pop instincts in the present, and a billionaire's proxy war over publishing catalogs can swallow even the most meticulously crafted art. The budget made it a liability before it even hit the shelves. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when the machinery of the music industry turns against its most valuable asset.
It is deeply bittersweet. The reality is that a piece of art can simultaneously be a visionary triumph and a casualty of corporate warfare. As we sit here in this room today, surrounded by all this glowing $30 million technology, it's hard not to feel the ghosts of that high-tech, high-stakes era.
It really makes you wonder what else is trapped in the vaults, silenced by a balance sheet.
It does. And it leaves us with a final thought for anyone putting on those headphones today. When you cue up this album, sit among those ghosts. Listen with a new ear, and you'll have to decide for yourself. Are you hearing the uncompromising architectural sound of the future, or are you hearing the heavy, echoing casualties of a devastating corporate war?